Hi, I'm Tony, and today we are going to finish off some English paper piecing. You may have taken one of my classes or purchased one of my patterns or kits, and it may be your first English paper piecing, and you're thinking to yourself, well, that's great. I put this thing together, but now what? What's the next step? That's what I'm going to show you today. As soon as you finish assembling your block or piece or whatever you have for your English paper piecing, before you move on, the first thing you want to do is take out all of the papers. So we used a water-based glue for the methods that I teach, or if you use the needle and thread basting, at this point snip the needle and thread and then it'll easily come away. If you use the glue basting with a water-based soluble, you peel up your fabric at this point. So just move around. If any of the fabric frays, that is perfectly okay. This fabric here is now your seam. So take the paper out. And now you notice that there are some flyaways for the fabric. Now we're going to iron it to hold it in place. Ironing. Don't be afraid. This is my Oliso iron. It is meant to look this way, just like this. It is a transformer because it has legs that keep it going up and down to protect my wrist. If you want more information on that, look down below. So let's iron this. Now, the trick is we want to keep all of our seams ironed open, because that's what they are already, is they're ironed open. But at the same time, we want to tuck in all of these little frayaways. So as we iron, we are just going to tuck those in, just like that. But I'm picking my iron up and putting it down so I don't iron away everything else. And I am using steam. Oh, and of course on my way out, I did that. Now, as you're ironing, if you have any issues with the fabric staying in, you can thread baste it again. Just make sure you don't slip it through this area. You do a slip stitch. So you slip it through the area here to keep these flyaways in. You can also, if you did the glue basting method, use your glue to do it. All right, so let's tuck this in here. I remember the first one that I did, I didn't understand this, and I appliqued it to a block, and the block then had a whole bunch of extra stuff sticking out at that point. All right, so we're going to fold this in here just like that, and then iron it in place. And this is very, very important to do this step because you don't want any loose open seams to hang out. And see how it looks just like that. All right, so I'm going to finish ironing this and come back. Now that your block is all ironed, at this point, if you're going to applique it down to another piece of fabric or something else, at this point you can do it. Or if this is a block into another block, at this point you can start sewing all of your blocks together because this block is ready to go. I'm going to take it a step farther and interface it a little bit and turn this into a plush throw. So if you're interested in that, keep going on and watching. So I am using for my interfacing a heat and bond fusible iron-on medium weight. So at this point, I'm going to trim my medium weight interfacing. So I'm using, of course, my Famore scissors. And all I'm doing is a general cut around. I'm making sure that it's bigger than the space that I need. And just a general larger circle, about an inch larger than what I need. Okay, so I can take my interfacing and set that aside. And then what I'm going to do for the backing. So I think a cute plush throw would look cute with a nice Pokemon backing. So at this point, I don't need a rotary cutter and straight edge. My scissors are perfectly fine. So I'm just going to cut my general fabric. So that is separated. And then the general fabric here. So again, I'm using a larger space and cutting that. And then now I can use that for a different project. So I have 2 things cut out that I then want to iron together. All right, confession time. The last clip, my plastic of my inner facing got a little bit too close to the iron and it melted along the edge of the iron, and there's a little bit that you see that got here onto my ironing pad. If that happens to you, if you get plastic near your iron, immediately take a towel, not a paper towel, a regular towel, and rub it against there to get it all off. Luckily, I got to it in time, so I got it all off. There are products like Iron Shine and Iron Clean that if you don't get it off in time, you can turn your iron off and actually clean it. So luckily, I got to in time. All right, so let's iron out our backing fabric for our throw. I am obsessed lately with making plushes. There is something about a plush that's just soft and cuddly and makes me feel better. Okay, so I've got that ironed. Now I want to iron the English paper piecing to my inner facing. So the inner facing has 2 sides. It has a side that has the glue that's kind of rough to feel, and then the other side that's nice and smooth. Only one side of inner facing has glue on it. And I did get the iron on. I forgot to mention that, the iron on glue interfacing. So heat and bond is an iron on glue interfacing. All right, first thing you want to do is all of the little threads that want to fly away, try to tuck those in underneath before you do your ironing. Make sure that everything is tucked in there nice and neat. And I've got that. Oops, there's another thread here. Let's get that tucked under there. And I think that's our last one. Yes. Okay, so we've got it all tucked under there. Now I'm going to iron this in place. Be very, very careful. You do not iron it. You don't have the iron touch the actual interfacing. The iron should only be touching your piece, your English paper piecing piece. Do not have it touch the interfacing. So see how I'm moving it back and moving the iron along so I don't have it touching. Now let me do the end over here. It is it's a nice, lovely issue trying to get enough heat onto something without having it go over and touch the interfacing. Whoops, I touched it there. See what happens? It wants to glue itself to your iron. So this will take a few minutes to actually get the whole thing. If you see here, see how this is pulling up here? It means I haven't ironed it all the way. So I'm going to spend some time and get everything ironed down. Everything is mostly ironed down, so now I want to take my piece and flip it over, and we're going to iron the wrong side. Now remember, there's no glue on this side, so we don't have to worry if we have to touch the iron or not. So I can actually go over just a little bit and then peel it away from my non-stick ironing surface. So at this point, I even iron it a little bit to the surface and just pull it away and then rub it out. All right, so we've got there. And this really locks it in. So you may ask, Tony, why are you doing this? Why add this extra layer of interfacing? Well, you notice how I'm locking every single one of these seams in place. So if I'm turning this into a plush, I'm going to have all of the fiber polyfill that's going to be rubbing against these seams, and it could possibly wear away the thread over time. So I'm locking this in so that over time that my plush is going to be long lasting. I can give it to a child and not worry about them working holes into it. Imagine your favorite plush or dog toy or something that you wear away those seams. It's an extra added measure for these seams to make sure that they're not going to have any issues. Okay, we have that. Now it's time to trim it. All right, I have my top, I have my back, and then of course I will shove in all the polyfill next. So I want to line this up to where I want it to be on that backing. Right sides to right sides, and I'm going to pin along the edges. So when I trim this, I want to make sure that everything is pinned nicely. Now, I'm not going to take these pins out. I'm immediately going to take this over to the sewing machine after I finish pinning and trimming this. So take these pins and pin all the way around through all of the layers. So you see the pins over through here. So all the way around this circle. Now all of our pins are holding it down. We're going to trim it. So I'm using my scissors to trim around. So I'm cutting off the backing fabric and my interfacing. Now, if I trim a little bit of my Pokeball of my English paper piecing, that is perfectly okay. Because remember, we're immediately heading to the sewing machine to sew this. So I am actually trimming away. You can see some of the fabric attached to the interfacing. I am trimming away some of my fabric. Like right here, there's a little bit sticking out. So I'm just trimming that away a little bit. And it's perfectly okay. You're not going to hurt anything because remember we are using a 1/4 inch seam to sew it all together. So I realized as I came over to the sewing machine, I put all of my pins in wrong. They're backwards. That makes a difference. So the pins need to go counterclockwise, not clockwise. So I'm going to fix those pins and then come back. Okay, pins are the right way. Now that's important because we want to be able to take our pins out as we're sewing and we don't want to sew over top those pins. So the first thing I'm going to do, oh, you know what? I want to start it along the bottom. I don't remember, I think the white's the bottom? Yes, I think the white's the bottom. So I want to start sewing a little bit off the bottom. And for me, that's important because the plush is going to, I want to have my closure be at the bottom. So I want to leave it an opening about 2 inches in that bottom area. So let's start it right here. Let's put our presser foot down and I'm going to sew forward a few steps. And then we're going to go back a few steps because we're locking in those seams. We really want to make sure that it's nice and locked in. And we're going to take our pins out as we sew. Now I'm using a 1/4 inch foot with guide. If you don't have one, there's information down below. It's a fantastic way of making sure that you're sewing a perfect 1/4 inch every single time. So I'm just going to sew slowly around, and you notice, well, you may notice that your 1/4 inch is following along the 1/4 inch inside of your English paper piecing. Here we are. And we're just going all the way around the circle, taking out our pins as we go. Now, when you reach the very end, so when we're almost about halfway around, when I reach the other side, when I'm all the way around the other end, at that point, I'm going to stop 2 inches from where I started. Remember, we want to leave a 2 inch opening to flip this around and to add in our polyfill, our stuffing. So let's stop. Let's go all the way around. There we are. I am almost there. Remember, don't sew over your pins. It's a horrible bad habit that I do sometimes. Sewing over your pins can cause issues with your sewing machine. It can have your timing go off. You can break your needles. You definitely do not want to do that. If you sew over your pins accidentally, you may need to take your machine into the shop. Okay, all right, so here is our start right here. So let's go until there's about 2 inches. That's good. All right, now let's back this up. Let's lock these seams in and then go forward again and trim it. Now comes the fun part of flipping this. If you are not used to this, you can leave a little bit of a bigger opening. But yeah, it is definitely practice. So what you're going to do is take your entire thing. I actually like to start from the very back end and pull it through. So you're flipping this, or as Fierce Kittens calls it, birthing it. So you're pulling the whole thing through this thing. Yeah, if you haven't seen Fierce Kitten's video on birthing a bag, it is amazing. So let's pull this whole thing through and we're going to work it. Work it good. All right, come on. Let's get this through this tiny little hole. And this is why we reinforce those seams at the beginning and the end, because we don't want to put strain on those seams and break them. So reinforcing those seams really gets it there. There we are. Once you get it started, it's easier and easier to do it. Now, the smaller the hole, the less of an opening you have to close. There we are, and we have pulled it through. There it is. All right, so now I'm going to put my fingers in there and I'm just going to pop out all those edges. There's also a few tools for this that you can do. I know Annie's has got a stiletto tool. There's definitely a few stiletto tools and plush tools out there that you can, it helps to pop out those edges. So let's pop these out. And after all of our edges are popped, we can then fill it with polyfill. So polyfill is a polyester stuffing that we're just going to take and pop it through here. Now you can fill your plush however full you like. So do you want a not full, softer, squishier plush, or do you want a firmer plush that you can hug and maybe use as a pillow? So either way is perfectly fine. So I'm just gonna stuff this full for a few moments and then come back and show you the ending. All right, at this point, my ball is mostly full of the polyfill. So now we need to close this hole. You have 2 options. The option is to hand close it. So in that case, you want to take your 2 edges, hold them closed, and use a slip stitch to get the needle and thread in there so that you don't have to see it. I am not, as much as I English paper piece, I am not great at closing plushes. So I like to use my sewing machine. So what I do is I just take this closure here and set it out. And let's make sure, because what will happen with plushes is it'll like to kind of slip away. Make sure that you have both, whoops, that you have, see what's happening, because it's full of all of this polyfill, it wants to move away. So I'm just going to keep moving the thread in place and the fabric in place. And let's back this up in order to lock it in place and then move forward, and it's sewn. For those of you that want to close it off by hand and do a hand closure, I will make sure I find a good tutorial and link it below. It's just not something that I'm good at, so I didn't want to show you something that wasn't great, which is why I use my machine to close mine. So at this point, when you're all finished, work it out. Get all of the polyfill nice and even and filled out so that you have your plush. Hopefully you learned something today. Don't forget to like this video, follow my YouTube, as well as my Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and don't forget about Twitch, where you can interact with me as I'm sewing live.